The roar of 50,000 Romans cuts to a sudden, terrible silence. In the center of the Colosseum, a gladiator named Ferox kneels in the blood-soaked sand, waiting for a single thumb to decide his fate. For 6 years and 43 fights, he has survived, earning the crowd's adoration. But today, the thumb turns down, and in that final moment, the brutal calculation of his life becomes clear. The glory was a lie. He was never a hero. He was livestock, an asset whose value had just run out. As the blade finds his neck, his last thought is of a slave market 6 years ago, where he was purchased for 10 coins less than the man who now kills him. Even in death, Rome would profit, selling his blood by the cup and his bones as powder. He was never a person. He was an investment, finally paying its last bloody dividend. This was the brutal reality for thousands of men who died for the entertainment of Rome. But how did the empire perfect this machinery of death? What psychological tools did they use to transform frightened slave boys into killers who would crave the roar of the very crowds that sentenced them to die? To understand, we must go back to the beginning, to a slave market where a human life had a price tag, and a long, bloody career in the arena was just getting started. 120 denarii. That's what a human life cost in Rome's slave market, less than a good horse. The morning sun cast long shadows across the forum as merchants arranged their living wares. Among them stood a 16-year-old Germanic boy, wrists bound, eyes wide with the kind of fear that comes from understanding your life now has a price tag. The auctioneer's voice carried over the crowd, listing attributes like a butcher describing cuts of meat, strong shoulders, good teeth, prime age for training. Potential buyers stepped forward, and this is where the true horror began. Fingers probed his joints, testing flexibility. They pressed his muscles, calculating potential. One buyer forced his mouth open, examining teeth like a veterinarian with livestock. Another made him jump, checking for hidden injuries. Each touch stripped away another layer of humanity. The boy, he still had a name then, though it would soon be forgotten, tried to steel himself against the examination. But how do you prepare for becoming property? How do you ready yourself for the moment when your worth becomes numerical? The buyer's eyes held a calculation darker than simple commerce. Marcus Crassus Aquilus ran the most profitable gladiator school in Rome. He didn't see a frightened teenager, he saw potential profit margins. The way the boy's muscles coiled under examination, the defiance barely hidden behind fear, these were investments waiting to mature. "Turn around," Aquilus commanded. The boy hesitated, just for a heartbeat. That flash of resistance sealed the deal. Gladiators needed spirit. File. Not too much. Just enough to survive the breaking process. The negotiation began. The seller started at 150 denarii, citing the boy's youth and obvious strength. Aquilus countered with 100, pointing out the cost of training, the risk of death before profitability. They settled at 120 quil, the price of 3 months' wages for a laborer, the cost of transforming a person into a product. As coins changed hands, something fundamental shifted in the universe. The boy watched the transaction with growing horror. This wasn't capture or enslavement, this was commerce. He'd become merchandise, as casual and legitimate as buying grain or wine. The crowd moved on to other sales. A woman from Gaul went for 90 denarii. Twin brothers from Thrace fetched 200 for the pair. Each sale normalized the next, creating a market where humanity became commodity through sheer repetition. What happened next would burn away his very name. Aquilus motioned to his guards, who grabbed the boy's arms with practiced efficiency. As they dragged him toward a smoking brazier at the market's edge, other slaves averted their eyes. They knew what came next. The boy struggled now, but iron grips held him steady. The smell hit first, hot metal and charcoal, mixed with something else. Fear, sweat, the remnants of others who'd stood here before. "Property of Marcus Crassus Aquilus," the brandmaster announced, lifting the glowing iron from the coals. The design was simple, MCA, surrounded by a gladius, a maker's mark for human merchandise. The boy's last free thought before the iron touched skin was absurdly practical. His mother would never recognize him now, not just because of the brand, but because of what he was about to become. Steam rose as metal met flesh. The sizzle seemed to last forever, though it was only seconds. The smell of burning skin mixed with the forum's everyday scents, spices, sweat, livestock, creating a nauseating normalcy that would haunt him forever. But the true price of his purchase wouldn't be paid in coins. It would be collected in blood, drop by drop, over 6 brutal years. The iron glowed orange-hot as they pressed it into his shoulder, the sizzle of flesh marking the exact second he stopped being human. The pain shot through him like lightning, but the boy bit down hard, refusing to scream. Not out of courage. OP. Terror had frozen his voice. Around him, the slave market continued its business. Merchants hawked pottery nearby. Children played between the stalls. The branding of human beings had become so routine that it didn't even draw stares. Marcus Crassus Aquilus watched with the detached interest of a craftsman overseeing quality control. The brand needed to be deep enough to scar permanently, but not so deep as to damage the muscle beneath. Damaged goods brought lower arena prices. "Hold him steady," the brandmaster muttered, pressing harder. The boy's knees buckled, but the guards kept him upright. This was practiced choreography. They knew exactly how much pressure kept a slave standing during the process. The smell mixed with the forum's everyday scents, creating a nauseating normalcy. Roasting meat from food stalls, leather from the tanneries, human flesh marked for ownership, all part of Rome's commercial symphony. When the iron finally lifted, the boy gasped, not from relief, but from the strange cold that followed burning. The brandmaster splashed vinegar on the wound, causing fresh agony. "Prevents infection," he explained to no one in particular. "Dead slaves don't train." The boy looked down at his shoulder. The letters MCA stood raised and angry against his skin, but it was the surrounding design that made his stomach turn. A gladius, a sword, circled the initials. He'd been marked not just as property, but as a specific kind of property. A fighting slave, a future corpse. Aquilus stepped closer, examining the brand with the same attention he'd give to a maker's mark on purchased pottery. Satisfied, he spoke a single word that would haunt the boy forever: Ferox. The boy's real name, the one his mother had whispered at his birth, the one his father had called across Germanic forests, died in that instant. Ferox meant fierce, wild, savage. It wasn't a name, it was a product description. "You'll answer to this now," Aquilus continued, his Latin sharp and clear. "Your old name belonged to a free man. Free men don't exist where you're going." The newly named Ferox wanted to protest, to insist on his identity, but the burning on his shoulder reminded him of a fundamental truth: branded things don't get to choose their names. Around them, other brandings continued. A woman screamed as iron touched her back. A child, he couldn't have been more than 12, whimpered as they marked his forearm. The systematic erasure of identity had become so efficient that 6 slaves could be branded in the time it took to properly cook bread. But branding was more than physical marking. Ferox would learn this in the coming days. The burn would heal, leaving raised scar tissue that marked him as property. But the deeper wound, 19 thing, the psychological brand, would never heal. Every time someone called him Ferox, every time he answered to it, he'd participate in his own erasure. The guards began leading him away from the market, and Ferox got his first real look at his owner. Aquilus moved with the confident economy of someone who'd transformed hundreds of boys into gladiators. His clothes were well made, but not ostentatious. His hands bore the calluses of someone who still trained with his fighters. This wasn't some distant aristocrat playing with human lives. His was a professional manufacturer of killers. "First lesson," Aquilus said as they walked. "Forget who you were. That person is dead. I bought his corpse for 120 denarii. What I'm creating is worth much more." They passed through the forum's crowds, senators discussing politics, mothers buying vegetables, children playing war with wooden swords. None of them really saw Ferox. The brand had made him invisible in a peculiar way. He'd become part of Rome's infrastructure, as unremarkable as the aqueducts or roads. His new owner spoke a single word that would haunt him forever: walk. Not because the command was cruel, but because of its casual certainty. Aquilus knew Ferox would obey. The brand had seen to that. The iron gates of the Ludus Magnus, each Nile, the great gladiator school, loomed ahead, 20 feet tall, topped with spikes. They looked less like an entrance and more like the mouth of some enormous beast, which Ferox would soon learn wasn't far from the truth. As they led him through iron gates towards stone walls that scraped the sky, he had no idea he was entering a factory designed to manufacture one product: killers. 200 men crammed into barracks built for 100. The overcrowding wasn't a mistake. It was psychological warfare. The moment Ferox passed through the gates, the smell hit him like a physical blow. Sweat, blood, and human waste mixed with the acrid tang of fear scent that no amount of cleaning could remove. The walls rose 15 feet high, topped with iron spikes that curved inward, not to keep others out, but to keep the gladiators in. The courtyard sprawled before him, packed dirt, stained dark with what could only be blood. Men moved through training routines with mechanical precision, but their eyes followed the new arrival. Fresh meat. Another body for the grinder. "Welcome to your new home," Aquilus said, gesturing at the complex with something approaching pride. "The finest gladiator school in Rome. Men kill for the chance to die here." The bitter irony in those words would only become clear later. For now, Ferox focused on the architecture itself, the way every element seemed designed to crush hope. The walls weren't just barriers, they were teachers, their height a daily reminder that the sky itself had become a privilege he'd lost. Windows sat too high to reach, letting in light but never views. Doors were narrow, forcing men to enter single file, no chance for coordinated resistance. Even the ground sloped subtly toward the center, creating a basin that trapped men like rainwater. A trainer shoved Ferox toward the barracks, and the real horror began. The building stretched long and narrow, with sleeping platforms stacked 3 high along both walls. Each space measured barely enough for a man to lie flat. No privacy, no personal space. Just flesh pressed against flesh in a deliberate violation of human dignity. "Find an empty spot," the trainer barked. "If there isn't one, make one." Ferox moved through the crush of bodies, trying not to gag at the smell. Men sat on their platforms, some sharpening weapons, others nursing wounds. A few played dice in the narrow aisle. All watched him with the flat assessment of people calculating whether he'd be competitor or corpse. He found a space on a middle platform, between a scarred Nubian and a pale Gaul missing 2 fingers. Neither acknowledged him. Personal connections were dangerous here. Another calculated cruelty. How do you rebel alongside men you've been conditioned to see as enemies? The walls weren't just barriers, they were teachers. Every surface bore marks of desperation. Scratched tallies counting days, names of forgotten men, crude drawings of homes that existed now only in memory. One inscription, carved deep and darkened with what might have been blood, simply read, "Mother." As darkness fell, the true genius of the overcrowding revealed itself. Sleep became impossible, but that was exactly the point. Bodies shifted constantly, seeking comfort that didn't exist. Snores, groans, and nightmare cries created a symphony of exhaustion. Men who couldn't sleep deeply couldn't dream of freedom. The Nubian beside him finally spoke, his Latin accented but clear. "First night?" Ferox nodded. "Gets worse," the man said simply. "Then you stop noticing. That's when you know they've won." Through the 2 high windows, stars appeared, distant and unreachable as memories of freedom. Ferox tried to picture his homeland's forests, but the walls pressed in, making even imagination feel like rebellion. A fight broke out near the door, 2 men grappling over a scrap of bread. No one intervened. The guards outside didn't even look. This too was intentional. Let them exhaust themselves on each other. Channel violence horizontally, never vertically. "Lights out," a voice called, and darkness swallowed the barracks. But darkness brought no relief. If anything, it intensified the claustrophobia. 200 men breathing in space built for half that number. The air grew thick, almost soup-like with human presence. Someone sobbed quietly. A new sound. Young. Another recent arrival learning that warriors were allowed to kill but never to cry. The sound cut off abruptly, whether from self-control or someone's fist. Ferox couldn't tell. He lay awake, shoulder throbbing where the brand had seared his flesh, surrounded by men who'd become weapons. The architecture worked on him already, walls and overcrowding conspiring to break down the boundaries between self and system. Sleep became impossible, but that was exactly the point. Exhausted men don't plan escapes. They don't form alliances. They just survive, one day collapsing into the next, until time itself becomes another wall. A bell rang before dawn, rain a bronze and pitiless. Men moved with practiced efficiency, folding blankets, preparing for another day of transformation. Ferox watched them, seeing his future in their automatic movements. Tomorrow, his real education would begin. 10,000 repetitions that would rewire his nervous system into something no longer quite human. Thrust, block, step, thrust, block, step. By the 1,000th repetition, thought disappears. By the 10,000th, you're not holding a weapon anymore. You are the weapon. Dawn broke over the practice yard as Ferox stood in line with 20 other novices. Their trainer, a former gladiator named Titus whose scars told stories of survival, demonstrated the basic thrust. Simple, direct, deadly. "This is your new language," Titus announced, his wooden gladius cutting air with practiced precision. "Forget words. Your sword speaks now." They started with wooden posts, 6 feet tall, wrapped in leather, standing like silent opponents. Each novice faced one, wooden sword in hand, beginning the endless repetition that would reshape their bodies and minds. Thrust. The wooden sword hit the post with a dull thud. Block. An imaginary counterattack deflected. Step. Footwork that would mean life or death in the arena. Again, Titus commanded. Thrust. Block. Step. Again. The sun climbed. Sweat began to flow. Ferox's arm started to burn, but Titus showed no mercy. "Pain is your teacher," he said, walking among them. "When your arm screams, you're learning. When it stops screaming, you've learned. Thrust. Block. Step." By the 100th repetition, Ferox's shoulder blazed where the brand had scarred. By the 500th, his entire arm felt like molten lead. But they continued. Always the same motion. Always the same rhythm. Other groups practiced around them. Advanced students sparred with real weapons, their combat a blur of deadly precision. The sound of their training, metal on metal, grunts of effort, bodies hitting sand, created a rhythm that matched the repetitions. Thrust. Block. Step. "Your enemy is thought," Titus explained, correcting someone's stance with his staff. "Thinking kills. Your body must know without your mind's permission." Ferox wanted to argue. Thinking made humans human, but his burning muscles had no energy for philosophy, only for the next repetition. Thrust. Block. Step. Lunch came, thin barley gruel that barely counted as food. They ate standing, wooden swords still in hand, then immediately returned to the posts. The afternoon sun turned the yard into an oven, but the repetitions continued. "Why do we train with wood?" a novice dared to ask. Titus smiled, an expression that made his scars twist grotesquely. "Wood is heavier than steel. When you finally hold a real gladius, it will feel like air. Your speed will double. Your enemy will die, wondering how you moved so fast." Thrust. Block. Step. By late afternoon, Ferox could no longer feel his arm as separate from the sword. The weapon had become an extension, moving without conscious command. His feet found their positions automatically. His body flowed through the movements like water following a carved channel. "Better," Titus noted, passing by. Now faster. The tempo increased. What had been methodical became frantic. Sweat flew with each movement. Breathing turned to gasping. Still they continued. Thrust. Block. Step. Faster. Thrust. Block. Step. Faster. A novice collapsed, muscles finally refusing. Guards dragged him to the side. No one else stopped. The repetitions had become more important than compassion. "He'll try again tomorrow," Titus said simply. "Or he'll die trying. Rome has no use for failed gladiators." As shadows lengthened, something strange happened to Ferox. The burning in his muscles faded to numbness. The wooden sword stopped feeling heavy. His body moved without his mind's involvement, executing perfect repetitions while his thoughts drifted elsewhere. He thought of home, forests, and freedom, but even those memories felt distant, unreal compared to the immediate reality of thrust, block, step. The repetitions were carving new pathways in his brain, overwriting who he'd been with, who they needed him to become. 10,000 by week's end, Titus announced as darkness approached. 50,000 by month's end. By year's end, you won't remember not knowing how to kill. His trainer's next words would reshape his entire identity. "You think you're learning to fight," Titus said, addressing all of them but somehow looking directly at Ferox. "You're wrong. You're learning to stop being human. Humans hesitate. Humans feel. Humans die. What we're creating doesn't." The training ended with darkness, but Ferox's body continued the movements. Even walking to the barracks, his muscles twitched through phantom repetitions. In his bunk, trying to sleep, his arm moved slightly, thrust, block, step, as if the training had possessed him. Around him, other gladiators showed the same symptoms. Years of repetition had programmed their bodies so thoroughly that they trained even in sleep. The mechanical transformation was complete, when your dreams consisted of perfect sword work. But the physical training was nothing compared to what they did to his mind. Tomorrow would bring new lessons: how to turn brothers into corpses, how to make family from slavery, how to crave the very system destroying you. They called it familiar, family, but this manufactured brotherhood would become the cruelest chain of all. "Call me father," the owner commanded, and somehow that single lie hurt worse than the brand. Marcus Crassus Aquilus stood before the assembled gladiators in the dining hall, arms spread in a gesture of paternal benevolence. Around him, 200 branded men sat at rough wooden tables, their family dinner a careful orchestration of control, disguised as kindness. "You are my sons," Aquilus continued, his voice warm with practiced affection. "This ludus is your home. These men are your brothers. We are familia." Ferox felt his stomach turn at the perversion of the word. Family, the same word his real father had used, teaching him to hunt in Germanic forests that now existed only in fading memory. But here, surrounded by stone walls and iron chains, the word became a weapon more cruel than any gladius. The system was brilliant in its simplicity. Take men stripped of everything: homeland, freedom, identity, and offer them a substitute: not freedom, but belonging; not genuine love, but its carefully manufactured shadow. "Brutus," Aquilus called to a scarred veteran, "stand up. Tell them how long you've been part of our family." The grizzled gladiator rose, his movements showing the easy confidence of a long-time survivor. 12 years, father. You bought me as a boy, made me a man." "And what are we to each other?" "Brothers in blood," Brutus replied automatically. "Family in iron." The phrase had been drilled into them as thoroughly as their sword work. Family in iron, brothers in blood. Pretty words to disguise an ugly truth. Livestock who'd been taught to love their barn. Aquilus smiled, the expression reaching his eyes with disturbing sincerity. He probably believed his own fiction. The most effective lies always contained enough truth to poison. "Tonight, we celebrate," he announced. "Tomorrow, Ferox begins his advanced training. No longer a novice, but a true son of this house." Applause erupted, genuine applause from men who'd learned to take pride in their own commodification. Ferox felt hands slapping his back, heard voices offering congratulations. The warmth of their acceptance wormed into him, despite his resistance. The woman they paired him with had eyes that reminded him of home. Lyra, a slave from the household, brought wine to his table. Their fingers brushed as she poured, and Aquilus noticed with satisfaction. "She's unmarked," the owner observed casually. "A reward for good sons. Companionship makes better fighters." The calculation behind the kindness revealed itself. Give gladiators something to lose, someone to protect. Connections that would make rebellion unthinkable because it would endanger not just themselves but those they'd learned to love. Ferox watched Lyra move through the room, noting how other gladiators' eyes followed her with protective affection rather than mere lust. She belonged to the familia too, another strand in the web binding them all. "During Saturnalia," Aquilus continued, "we feast as equals. Master serves slave. The world inverts, as the gods intended." The promise hung in the air like perfume. For a few days each year, they'd play at being human. Ferox had heard of the festival, when Rome's strict hierarchies temporarily dissolved. Slaves could speak freely, gamble with masters, pretend at dignity. During Saturnalia, everything would turn upside down, or so they let them believe. The cruelty of that hope would only reveal itself later. For now, the gladiators absorbed the promise like drought-stricken earth, absorbing rain. "But family means responsibility," Aquilus added, his tone shifting subtly. "Brothers protect each other. Sons honor their father. Betrayal of familia is worse than death." The warmth in the room chilled slightly. Everyone knew the unspoken threat. Gladiators who tried to escape didn't just die. They died slowly, publicly, while their brothers were forced to watch. The family that embraced you would also be the one to execute you. Titus raised his cup. "To familia!" The toast echoed through the hall, 200 voices unified in their captivity. Ferox drank, the wine bitter on his tongue. That night, Lyra came to him, not because she chose to, but choice didn't exist here, but because the system encouraged such pairings. Love between slaves created unbreakable chains. Children born in the ludus would be raised as future gladiators, continuing the cycle. She spoke of her homeland, Thrace, mountains and snow. Her voice carried the same nostalgic ache that lived in every slave's words. They were all orphans here, building new families from shared loss. "Do you ever think of running?" she whispered in the darkness. "Every day," Ferox admitted. But he couldn't answer, because already, after mere weeks, the thought of leaving felt like abandoning family. The brothers who trained beside him, Titus, who taught with cruel kindness, even Aquilus, whose paternal performance had begun to feel almost real. The ludus had become a web of relationships, round, friendships forged in shared suffering, mentorships built on survival, romance blooming in slavery's shadow, each connection, another bar in an invisible cage. When the festival ended and chains returned, he finally understood. They'd been given just enough dignity to make slavery feel like mercy. Demetrius. They'd shared bread that morning. Now one of them had to die. The sand of the practice arena felt different under Ferox's feet. Oh, calm. Not the familiar packed earth of daily training, but fresh sand brought in for this specific purpose. Around the square, his brothers in chains formed a living wall, their faces carefully neutral. They knew the rule: show too much emotion during an execution bout, and you'd be next. Aquilus stood on a raised platform, playing host to a dozen potential sponsors, rich Romans, seeking to invest in gladiators, here to evaluate the merchandise. What better way to display quality than a fight to the death? "Two of my finest novices," Aquilus announced with a showman's flair. 6 months of training culminating in this moment. Only one can advance to the games. Ferox gripped his gladius, for real steel for the first time, lighter than the practice wood but somehow heavier with purpose. Across from him, Demetrius did the same. They'd arrived the same week, branded on the same day, learned to kill at the same posts. The night before, they'd talked about their homes. Demetrius came from fishing villages along the Greek coast. He'd described the colour of morning sun on water with poets' words. Now those same eyes that had sparkled with memory held nothing but professional assessment. "Begin," Aquilus commanded. They circled each other, footwork perfect from those 1,000 repetitions. The crowd of gladiators watched in silence, but the sponsors chatted among themselves, commenting on form and potential like judges at a cattle show. Demetrius struck first, a testing thrust that Ferox deflected easily. They knew each other's patterns, had sparred countless times, but this wasn't sparring. One of them would feed tomorrow's dogs. The crowd had no idea they were watching friends become killers. To the sponsors, this was simple quality control. To the watching gladiators, it was reminder and warning. To Ferox and Demetrius, it was the moment their humanity finally broke. They exchanged a flurry of attacks, muscle memory guiding their movements. Thrust, block, step, the endless repetitions now serving their ultimate purpose. Neither could land a decisive blow. They were too evenly matched, too familiar with each other's rhythms. "Pathetic," one sponsor commented loudly. "They fight like dancers, not warriors." Aquilus's jaw tightened. Bad reviews meant less investment. Less investment meant fewer resources. The mathematics of the ludus demanded blood. "Finish it," he commanded, voice carrying the weight of economic necessity. The command changed everything. Both gladiators understood, and hesitation now meant both might die. The system wouldn't tolerate weakness that threatened profitability. Ferox saw the shift in Demetrius's stance, the subtle tell he'd noticed during training. His friend was about to attempt his favorite combination: high feint, low strike, rising thrust. Knowledge that had helped them improve together would now help one kill the other. As his sword found its mark, something inside him shattered forever. Not the moment of penetration, untiish, that was almost anticlimactic, steel sliding between ribs with surprising ease. Not Demetrius's gasp of pain and surprise, not even the warm blood coating his hands. What broke was the instant their eyes met, and Demetrius nodded slightly, understanding, forgiveness, and farewell in a single gesture. He'd known the counter was coming, had chosen not to adjust. One of them had to die, and he'd decided it wouldn't be Ferox. The Greek fell to his knees, then forward. Blood darkened the sand in an expanding circle. Ferox stood over the body of his friend, gladius dripping, as the sponsors erupted in approval. "Excellent form on the killing stroke," one observed. "Clean, efficient. How much for his contract?" Aquilus beamed with paternal pride. That one's not for sale. He's family. The words hit Ferox like physical blows. Family. He'd just killed family for the entertainment of investors. The system had made him complicit in his own degradation. But the worst part wasn't the killing. It was what happened when the crowd erupted in approval, and for the first time in his enslaved life, he felt powerful. The sensation shocked him. 50 gladiators cheering, sponsors nodding approvingly, Aquilus looking at him with genuine pride. After weeks of dehumanization, their validation flooded through him like wine. He'd proven himself, shown his worth, earned his place in the familia through blood sacrifice. The very system grinding him down now lifted him up, and the psychological whiplash left him reeling. They dragged Demetrius's body away with casual efficiency. By evening, new sand would cover the blood. By tomorrow, a new recruit would fill his bunk. The machine would continue, fed by an endless supply of Demetrius's and Ferox's. Your first kill is always the hardest, Titus said later, finding Ferox staring at his still bloody hands. Also, the most important, you can't go back now. You've tasted what we are. What are we? Dead men who haven't stopped moving yet, Titus replied. The only question is, how many we take with us. That night, Ferox dreamed of Greek fishing villages he'd never see, described by a friend he'd murdered for approval. But when morning came, when the bronze bell summoned them to training, he felt something new in the way other gladiators looked at him. Respect, fear, acknowledgement. He'd graduated from trainee to killer, and worst of all, part of him was proud. The addiction had begun, not to violence itself, but to the validation that came with it. Soon, children would play with wooden figurines of him, never knowing they held a toy version of Rome's most profitable slave. 50,000 voices screaming your name. It hits your bloodstream faster than wine, stays in your system longer than opium. The tunnel beneath the Colosseum amplified every sound from above. Ferox stood in darkness, hearing the crowd's roar build like distant thunder. His hands trembled, not from fear anymore, but from anticipation. 3 years of killing had rewired him into something that craved what waited above. Ferox, Ferox, Ferox. The chant started in the patrician sections and spread like wildfire through the plebeian seats. His name, not his real name, never that, but the brand they'd burned into him, echoed off stone walls until it became the only name that mattered. The gate cranked open. Sunlight blinded him momentarily, then revealed the impossible magnitude of Roman entertainment. 50,000 faces turned toward him, a sea of humanity united in bloodlust. The noise hit like a physical force, driving air from his lungs. He raised his gladius, and the crowd exploded. The sensation defied description. Every cheer seemed to vibrate through his bones. The collective approval of 50,000 Romans flooded his nervous system more powerfully than any drug. His skin tingled. His heart raced. Colors seemed brighter, sounds sharper, as if the world itself had suddenly come into focus. This was what they'd been building toward, with every repetition, every calculated cruelty. Not just a killer, but a performer. Not just a slave, but a star. His opponent emerged from the opposite gate, a Thracian with a curved seeker, experienced but past his prime. The crowd booed half-heartedly. They'd come for Ferox, their new favorite, the Germanic warrior who'd won 7 consecutive bouts with brutal efficiency. They circled each other, but Ferox barely saw his opponent. His awareness expanded to encompass the entire arena. He could feel the crowd's attention like heat from a forge, their excitement building with each feint and thrust. The Thracian attacked, a desperate lunge from a man who knew he was expected to die. Ferox deflected easily, could have ended it there, but didn't. The crowd wanted a show. They wanted their money's worth of blood and struggle, so he gave it to them. Each perfectly timed dodge earned gasps. Every flashy parry brought cheers. He was dancing now, not just fighting, performing a choreography of violence that transformed butchery into art. The crowd loved him for it. Ferox, Ferox, Ferox. Each cheer carved away another piece of who he used to be. That Germanic boy who dreamed of forests? Dead, buried beneath the roar of Roman approval. In his place stood Ferox the gladiator, Ferox the entertainer, Ferox the profitable slave who'd learned to love his chains because they came with applause. When he finally drove his blade home, a theatrical thrust that sprayed blood in a perfect arc, the Colosseum erupted. 50,000 people on their feet, screaming his name, showering the sand with flowers and coins. He stood in the center of it all, arms raised, drinking in their worship. The addiction had him now, completely. This feeling, this godlike moment of absolute validation, was worth any price. Worth freedom, worth dignity, worth his soul. By his 10th victory, he'd stopped remembering his real name. Why would he need it? That name belonged to nobody. A forest savage who'd never felt the drug of mass adoration. Ferox was somebody. Ferox was loved. Ferox mattered, even if only as entertainment. The sponsors understood this psychology perfectly. After each victory, they paraded him through the streets. Women threw themselves at him. Men bought him drinks. Children begged to touch his armor. For a few hours, he wasn't property. He was a god. Then, back to the ludus. Back to the cell. Back to being merchandise. But the memory of that worship lingered, an ache worse than any wound. He'd tasted divinity and would do anything for another sip. "You're one of the lucky ones," Titus told him one evening. "The crowd chose you as a favorite. Most die in obscurity." "Lucky?" Ferox laughed bitterly. "You don't understand yet," the veteran replied. "The unlucky ones die quickly. The lucky ones, we die by degrees, addiction eating us hollow. But for a while, we get to pretend we're more than meat." Each victory made the addiction worse. The crowd's standards rose. They wanted more blood, more spectacle, more of whatever made Ferox special. He gave it gladly, desperately, like an offering to hungry gods. Between matches, life felt grey and muted. Food had no taste. Conversation held no interest. Only in the arena, only with 50,000 voices screaming his name, did existence have meaning. He'd become dependent on his captor's approval for any sense of self. They'd designed this perfectly. A gladiator who fought for freedom might escape or rebel, but a gladiator who fought for applause, he'd chain himself tighter with every victory, addicted to the very system destroying him. Soon, children would play with wooden figurines of him, never knowing they held a toy version of Rome's most profitable slave. His face on oil lamps, his name on tavern walls. Fame became a prison without bars because everyone knew the slave who couldn't hide. The pottery shop displayed them prominently. Oil lamps, moulded with Ferox's likeness, complete with his distinctive scar across the left eyebrow. "Genuine gladiator merchandise," the vendor proclaimed. "Light your home with the flame of victory." Ferox stared at his own face, mass-produced and selling for 3 sestertii each. Housewives would fill these lamps with oil, and his image would burn nightly in Roman homes. The thought made him sick, but also, and this was the truly diseased part, proud. 23 victories, Aquilus noted, standing beside him in the market. They'd come to gauge public interest, to calculate Ferox's current market value. "Your face is almost as recognizable as the Emperor's." It was barely an exaggeration. Tavern walls bore crude paintings of his fights. Street corners echoed with children playing Ferox and the Thracian, wooden swords clacking as they recreated his victories. He'd become myth while still breathing. This was the reward for survival. MBI. Transformation from person to product, from slave to symbol. The invisible chains of celebrity bound tighter than any iron shackle. "My lady requests your presence," a perfumed messenger announced, approaching them in the forum. He handed Aquilus a sealed letter reeking of expensive oils. "The senator's wife wishes to sponsor the gladiator personally." Ferox had received dozens of such invitations. Aristocratic women found gladiators irresistibly exotic. Trained killers who might whisper about death between silk sheets. The reality was more grotesque. Command performances, where he stood like a prize bull, while bored patricians fondled his scars. Senatorial wives sent perfumed letters to a man who slept in filth. They wrote poetry about his noble savage beauty, while he counted days in scratches on stone walls. One had offered to buy him outright, to keep as a private bodyguard. Aquilus had declined. Ferox was worth more in the arena than in some matron's bed. "You'll attend tonight," his owner commanded. Senator Claudius's sponsorship could fund an entire season. Smile. Be charming. Let his wife pour at you if she wishes. The senator's villa squatted on the Palatine Hill like a marble toad, all columns and fountains and casual wealth. Ferox entered through the slave entrance, of course. Fame didn't change his fundamental status. The party was already flowing with wine and false laughter when they presented him like an exotic animal. "The famous Ferox," Senator Claudius announced. 23 victories. They say he's never known defeat. Guests circled him, commenting on his physique as if he couldn't understand Latin. Women traced his scars with painted nails. Men challenged him to arm wrestling, wanting to tell friends they'd tested themselves against a real gladiator. He'd become too famous to ever be free. Even if he escaped the ludus, where would he run? His face decorated half the taverns in Rome. Street artists sketched him from memory. Children could describe his fighting style in perfect detail. "Is it true you killed 2 men with 1 thrust?" a young patrician asked breathlessly. "Does Germanic blood really run colder than Roman?" Another wondered. "Show us a fighting stance." He performed like a trained bear, demonstrating moves that had killed dozens. They applauded his pantomime of murder, never recognizing the bitter irony. They celebrated him for the very violence they'd condemned him to perform. Senator Claudius's wife finally appeared, draped in silk worth more than 100 gladiators. She was beautiful in the Roman way, pale, soft, untouched by any hardship greater than choosing which slave would style her hair. "Leave us," she commanded, and the room emptied except for guards at the doors. She circled Ferox slowly, examining him like merchandise, which, he reminded himself, he was. "They say you're undefeated," she purred. "I wonder, are you undefeatable in all things?" The proposition hung in the air like incense. Refuse and lose sponsorship. Accept and become a different kind of whore. Either way, his fame had trapped him in scenarios no amount of sword skill could resolve. "My lady honors me," he replied carefully, "but I belong to the arena." She laughed, a tinkling sound like breaking glass. "How noble! The savage has Roman virtues." Her hand traced his chest, possessive and casual. "I'll sponsor you anyway. I like owning beautiful things, even if I can only admire them from afar." Back at the ludus, younger gladiators looked at him with envy. They saw the glory, face on lamps, noble sponsors, crowds chanting his name. They didn't see the cage it created, how fame had made him too valuable to free and too visible to escape. His success had become another chain. Break it, and he'd destroy not just himself, but the entire economic ecosystem built around his celebrity. Merchants selling his likeness, sponsors investing in his victories. The ludus itself, now famous for producing Ferox the undefeated. He'd become too famous to ever be free, a slave to his own legend. The boy from Germania had vanished completely, replaced by a profitable fiction that Rome would milk until the last drop of blood. After 43 fights, his body kept a ledger of damage that mathematics said could only be balanced one way. Shattered left knee, torn shoulder tendons, a sword arm that trembled in the mornings. Each injury was a withdrawal from an account that couldn't be refilled. Ferox woke to the familiar agony, his body's daily reminder that flesh had limits even when will didn't. 6 years of arena combat had written its history across him in scar tissue and grinding joints. The left knee, shattered in his 15th bout and never properly healed, screamed when he put weight on it. The shoulder tendons, torn during a match with a retiarius, sent lightning through his arm with each movement. But it was the tremor that terrified him most. His sword hand, steady as stone during his prime, now shook each morning like an old man's. The trembling usually faded after warm-ups, but it took longer each day. Soon, it wouldn't fade at all. Around him, other veterans showed the same signs of decay. Marcus, once the fastest gladiator in Rome, now moved like honey in winter. Quintus had lost peripheral vision from too many head blows. Death approaching from his blind side was just a matter of time. "Hide it better," Titus advised, watching Ferox struggle through morning drills. "The moment they see weakness, you're done." But hiding grew harder with each passing day. The body kept its own accounting, and Ferox was deep in debt. Every block jarred damaged joints. Every thrust pulled at scar tissue. His legendary speed had slowed by fractions observers might not notice, but opponents would. In the ludus's crude infirmary, the doctor, a Greek slave who'd learned medicine by treating gladiators, catalogued the damage with clinical detachment. Cartilage gone in the left knee. Microfractures throughout the right tibia. Severe tendon damage in the rotating cuff. Brain trauma from repeated impacts. "How long?" Ferox asked. The doctor shrugged. "Your body should have quit 2 years ago. Will alone keeps you moving, but will won't stop a blade when your reflexes fail." Mathematics governed everything in the arena. Reaction time measured in heartbeats. speed calculated in footsteps, strength quantified by how long you could maintain your guard. Ferox had built his reputation on being faster, stronger, more relentless than opponents. Now those advantages eroded daily. His opponent was 19, fresh, unbroken, 19 found, everything he no longer was. The match had been announced that morning. Ferox the veteran against Ajax the rising star. The crowd would expect a passing of torches, old giving way to new. They had no idea they'd be watching an execution. Ajax trained in the opposite corner of the yard, his movements fluid and effortless. No grinding joints, no trembling hands, no 6 years of accumulated damage slowing every action. He fought with the casual arrogance of someone who'd never felt their body betray them. "I've seen that look before," Brutus said, joining Ferox at the water barrel. "Calculating whether you have one more fight in you, do I?" The older gladiator studied him with eyes that had watched hundreds die. "Your knee will give out in the third exchange. He'll notice your blind spot on the left. The head trauma makes you blink too much on that side. Your stamina will fade after 5 minutes, maybe 6. He can fight for 20. The mathematics of mortality, calculated with brutal precision. Ferox had always known this day would come. The arena allowed no graceful retirements. You fought until you couldn't, then you died. The only variable was how many victories you accumulated before the inevitable. When he stumbled in the sand, 50,000 people leaned forward. The moment had arrived, the great Ferox showing weakness. He recovered quickly, turning the stumble into a tactical roll, but damage was done. Blood scented the water now. Ajax would attack with renewed confidence. They circled each other in the arena's center, and Ferox felt every injury simultaneously. The damaged knee threatened to buckle. The torn shoulder screamed with each sword movement. The tremor in his hand required constant concentration to suppress. Ajax struck with youth's explosive power, and Ferox barely deflected in time. The impact jarred his entire skeleton, damaged joints grinding against each other. Another strike, another desperate parry. The younger gladiator's eyes lit up with realization. Aran Vesa, the legend was mortal after all. The crowd sensed it too. Their cheers took on a different quality, less celebration and more anticipation. They'd come to see history, either Ferox's greatest comeback or his final fall. Either would entertain. His body's betrayal was complete now. Reflexes that had saved him countless times fired a heartbeat too late. Strength that had overwhelmed opponents drained away like water from a cracked cup. The very flesh that had made him profitable now guaranteed his doom. Ajax pressed his advantage, strikes coming faster than Ferox's damaged body could match. The left knee finally gave out completely, dropping him to the sand. The younger gladiator's sword point found his throat, and suddenly, all of Rome fell silent. The crowd's roar became a chaos of thumbs, up, down, sideways, but only one thumb mattered, and it belonged to the editor who would calculate his worth in denarii and decide if he'd earned the right to die. Even his blood had a price. Free, 20 denarii per cup, collected while still warm, sold to epileptics who believed gladiator blood could cure their shaking. The editor's thumb hovered as Ferox knelt in the sand, Ajax's blade at his throat. Around them, 50,000 Romans held their breath, but the editor wasn't listening to the crowd. He was calculating. 43 victories meant considerable fame. Fame meant merchandise value even in death. The blood alone, 20 denarii per cup from desperate epileptics, 2 PIE would fill perhaps 30 cups before coagulation. 600 denarii just from blood. The flesh market paid premium for gladiator meat. Senators believed consuming a warrior's strength transferred to them. At current prices, Ferox's body would yield another 1,000 denarii in select cuts. The heart especially, that would go to the highest bidder, probably some aristocrat seeking courage. The bones, ground into powder and mixed with wine, sold as aphrodisiacs, another 300 denarii. Even the rendered fat had value, used in medicines and cosmetics. Nothing would be wasted. The thumb turned downward. Ajax's blade opened Ferox's throat with professional precision. As blood poured onto sand, attendants rushed forward with collection cups. The transition from warrior to commodity happened in seconds. One moment a man, the next merely valuable meat. Senators would dine on his flesh tonight, discussing politics between bites. They'd pay 50 denarii per pound for gladiator steak, never thinking about the person they consumed. Just another delicacy for jaded palates, like peacock tongues or dormice in honey. The butchers worked with practiced efficiency in the Colosseum's underground chambers. They'd processed hundreds of gladiators, knew exactly how to separate meat from bone, how to package nobility's grotesque appetites. Ferox's body, which had survived 43 combats, yielded to their knives without resistance. Good marbling, one butcher noted professionally. The fear at the end improves the flavor. His blood was bottled in small vials, each marked with his name and victory count. Epileptics would drink it warm, believing the vitality of gladiators could cure their afflictions. Physicians prescribed it. Collectors hoarded it. Desperate people paid fortunes for it. Ferox's blood became medicine, myth, and merchandise simultaneously. The bones went to different processors, cleaned, dried, ground into powder finer than flour. Mixed with wine, they'd be sold as virility enhancers. Old men would consume Ferox's calcium-seeking youth, never realizing they drank pulverized despair. His bones would strengthen strangers, while his name faded to myth. The oil lamps bearing his likeness would eventually break. The tavern paintings would fade. New gladiators would rise to capture Rome's fickle attention. But for now, he remained profitable even in death. Excellent quality, the merchant assessed, weighing packages of flesh. This one ate well, trained hard. The meat will fetch top price. That night, at a senator's banquet, they served him on silver platters. Aristocrats who'd cheered his victories now consumed his flesh, commenting on the texture, the flavor, the symbolic power of eating a warrior. One woman giggled that she could feel his strength entering her. The final accounting was precise. Blood sales, 600 denarii. Flesh, 1,000 denarii. Bones and byproducts, 300 denarii. Total value of Ferox's corpse, 1,900 denarii. After expenses, the ludus profited 1,500 denarii from his death, more than 10 times his original purchase price. But the profits didn't end there. His death funded something even worse, the purchase of 12 new boys, including a Gallic child who cost 130 denarii, 10 more than he had 6 years ago. The inflation of human prices reflected the arena's growing popularity. More games meant more gladiators, meant more boys transformed into profitable corpses. 3 days after they scraped his blood from the sand, his death funded something even worse, the purchase of 12 new boys, including a Gallic child who cost 130 denarii, 10 more than he had 6 years ago. The editor's thumb completed its descent, sealing what had been decided the moment a 16-year-old Germanic boy was marked with hot iron. The crowd erupted, not with sympathy for the fallen warrior, but with excitement for the spectacle of death. They'd gotten their money's worth. As Ferox's blood soaked into sand, the machinery of commodification engaged with practiced efficiency. Attendants appeared with collection vessels, careful not to waste a drop of valuable fluid. The transformation was immediate and absolute, from Rome's celebrated killer to Rome's latest product. Within minutes, his blood was being bottled and priced. Within hours, his flesh would grace aristocratic tables. Within days, his bones would be ground into powder and sold in the Subura's cramped shops. The system had extracted 6 years of entertainment from his life. Now it would extract every last sestertius from his death. The young Gallic boy stood in the slave market, wrists bound, as merchants discussed his potential. Strong shoulders, good reflexes, prime age for training. The cycle beginning anew, as it had for centuries, as it would for centuries more. He cost 130 denarii. Null, inflation in the human market reflecting the arena's growing demands. Where Ferox had been purchased for 120, this boy commanded more because the machinery had become more efficient, the process more refined, the profits more certain. They branded him that afternoon. The iron sizzled against flesh. As another identity died, another product was born. He'd be given a fighting name, perhaps Validus or Pugnax, something that would sound impressive when 50,000 voices screamed it. In 6 years, maybe 8 if he was lucky, he too would kneel in blood-soaked sand, while an editor calculated his final value. His blood would cure epileptics. His flesh would feed senators. His bones would promise virility to aging men. Another human transformed into commodity, another life reduced to mathematics. The arena changed shape but never disappeared. The only difference now? We call it entertainment instead of execution, and the gladiators volunteer. The Romans at least were honest about their brutality. They acknowledged they were watching humans destroy themselves for pleasure. They understood the transaction: blood for amusement, death for profit. Modern audiences hide behind screens and statistics, pretending our consumption of human destruction is somehow more civilized. But the mathematics remain unchanged. Young bodies enter the machine. The system transforms them into products. The audience consumes their destruction. Profits fund the next generation of victims. The only evolution is inefficiency and denial. Ferox died believing he'd been a warrior. The Gallic boy would die believing the same. Thousands before them, thousands after, all feeding a machine that transformed human potential into profitable destruction. The brand might be corporate logos now instead of slave marks, but the flesh still sizzles, identity still dies, and the crowd still screams for blood. The arena never disappeared. It just learned to hide its thumbs.